There's a kind of an old joke that says, how can you tell when a politician is lying? And the answer is you can tell he's lying because his lips are moving. I like to think there's a corollary, which is how do you tell someone's a politician? Because they keep talking about the middle class.
The middle class needs our help.
So what happened to the middle class? They lost their jobs. They lost their houses.
The middle class has been chipped at, squeezed, and hammered for an entire generation now.
They're trying to raise taxes on the middle class.
Washington is hanging the middle class out to dry.
The middle class, it's the foundation of our political conversation. It's the one safe thing politicians can talk about. Mom, apple pie, and saving the middle class. Far fewer people are willing to talk about American poverty. Not the unemployed, not folks who are down on their luck, but the poor. We don't really talk about the poor in this country. In very official terms, the U.S. economy slipped into a recession at the end of 2007 and started to recover partway through 2009. You can argue we're not growing enough to really be out of the old recession. You could argue that we're about to fall into a new recession, a double dip. But we are growing at least a little. You want to see what else is growing? Poverty. Last year, 15% of Americans were living below the poverty line. More than 46 million people. 46 million a year after the recession ended and the recovery began. And it's not an accident. It's the natural outcome of the choices our government makes. When Republicans in the Senate refuse to even consider a bill to keep teachers and cops and firefighters working, as they did last night, when Republicans do that, they are choosing to put people out of work and keep them that way. When Republicans in Congress defend tax cuts for the rich and call for tax hikes on working families, they're shifting resources from the less advantaged to those who already have more than they need. It's hard to believe you could even take a position like that with a straight face in this country. Unless you think this whole poverty thing is a joke. The Conservative Heritage Foundation this year questioned the whole idea of poverty. Quote, the overwhelming majority of the poor have air conditioning, cable TV, and a host of other amenities. They are well housed, have an adequate and reasonably steady supply of food. Reasonably steady? And have met their other basic needs, including medical care. The latest Republican argument is that the poor have no one to blame but themselves. They're not really poor, they're failures.
Don't blame Wall Street. Don't blame the big banks. If you don't have a job and you're not rich, blame yourself. It is not a person's fault because they succeeded. It is a person's fault if they failed.
Herman Cain is now leading in the polls for the Republican nomination. Just barely, but Herman Cain is the front runner. And Herman Cain is winning in part because the Republican base loves the idea of getting tough on the poor.
Herman Cain, I got to ask you, you said, quote, 2 weeks ago, you said, don't blame Wall Street, don't blame the big banks. If you don't have a job and you're not rich, blame yourself. That was 2 weeks ago. The movement has grown. Do you still say that?
Yes, I do still say that. And here's why. Wall Street didn't put in failed economic policies. Wall Street didn't spend $1 trillion that didn't do any good. Wall Street isn't going around the country trying to sell another $450 billion. They ought to be over in front of the White House taking out their frustration. So I do stand by that.
Woohoo! Blame yourselves, poor people of America. Do it for Herman Cain. Do it for those nice middle-class people applauding in the audience. Well, this is the face of poverty in America. This is who's poor in our country. Children, particularly Latino and Black children. Last year, a year after the Great Recession, 1 in 5 kids in America lived in poverty. 4 of every 10 African-American children. Where I live, in New Orleans, most of the young Black children are poor. Not some, not many, most. Nationally, it's Latino kids who suffer most. More than 6 million Latino kids in poverty in this country now. We have so many children living in poverty that they outnumber the population of all but our 4 largest states. And here's the most shocking part. This is within our control. We do not have to sit back and watch poverty and child poverty rise. Our problem with child poverty in particular results largely from a failure of political will, not from a lack of resources. When you compare America to the world's other rich nations, we're on the wrong side of average, and we're way down at the bottom. We're a giant nation and a very rich one, but in terms of how we treat our kids, we're down there with tiny Portugal and with Hungary and Poland from the old Soviet bloc. Our kids are poor like that. And when people cheer for the poor to blame themselves, that's what they're clapping about. Children. American children who never lost a job or made a bum decision about a career or did anything at all that would expose them to blame for their own condition. American kids who might even have a reasonably steady supply of food, as they say in conservative circles, as if that were somehow enough.